He sits alone in the dim glow of his apartment, the city humming faintly beyond the window, neon lights painting his skin in fractured blues and reds. His chest tightens as he scrolls through her messages, every word a subtle jab, a quiet standard he could never reach. He had thought himself strong. He had thought himself unshuckable. But here, in the silence punctuated by the electric buzz of his own phone, he feels small, inadequate, invisible. He had attempted to assert himself, to speak with honesty, to claim his presence. Yet every attempt met the subtle, almost imperceptible comparison. He does this? He said that? He would. And with it, a sting deeper than the sharpest betrayal. He tries to argue, to assert his value, but the words fall flat, hollow. The walls seem closer now, the air heavier. And he realizes something terrifying. The battlefield is not external. The battlefield is within, and every time she measures him against another, he has unconsciously ceded ground. This is the crucible, the quiet annihilation that gnaws at the essence of a man before any confrontation ever begins. Machiavelli whispers through the ages. Power is not merely taken in the open, but preserved in the unseen, in the subtle, in the mind of the other, before the mind of the self. And herein lies the promise. Understanding the hidden architecture of comparison grants a man dominion over it. This is not about winning a debate. It is about winning the terrain of perception itself. A man who understands this does not rage against the mirror. He shapes it, bending its reflection to his advantage. The thesis is simple, yet infinitely complex. A woman's comparisons are the battlefield, and mastery is not in fighting her, but in mastering the man she measures. The first confrontation arises not in words, but in presence. Imagine him walking into a room where she casually recounts the exploits of another man, a colleague, a friend, a shadow from her past. The silent command here is subtle yet absolute. The hidden dynamic is not the story she tells, but the power it wields over his self-conception. Most men react immediately, defensively, attempting to assert superiority through rebuttal or evidence. "I can do that too," they might say, or "That's not impressive." The collapse is instantaneous and inevitable. The moment he seeks validation through external comparison, he loses. The power response is different. He does not fight the story. He enlarges his presence in silence, letting his confidence radiate as an unspoken truth that no comparison can pierce. He listens with controlled detachment, nods with calm, and when he speaks, his words carry weight not because they argue, but because they exist in a plane above the narrative she presents. Perception shifts. She no longer measures him against others because she feels the gravitational pull of his self-possession. Comparisons cannot exist where dominance is silent yet absolute. The man who masters this moment understands that the battlefield is mental before it is verbal, and that victory is claimed not by dismantling others, but by fortifying oneself. The second escalation emerges in intimacy, in private moments that should be sacred, yet are tainted with shadowed reflection. She recounts experiences with past lovers, subtly drawing lines between his failures and their triumphs. The hidden dynamic is the subtext of insecurity, a testing of his territory, a probing of his foundations. The common response is panic, insecurity spilling into conversation, the repetition of promises, reassurances that crumble under scrutiny. This is predictable. The power response, as Machiavelli's principle dictates, is to redirect the narrative without submission. He does not compete, he reframes. He allows her to speak while projecting an aura of unshakable self-assurance, demonstrating through action and subtle gesture that comparison is irrelevant in his orbit. Perception shifts. The story of her past loses gravity, its weight nullified not by argument, but by the presence of a man who has anchored himself in certainty. At this point, a deeper reflection emerges. The man must internalize the recognition that every comparison she draws is a shadow cast, not on his worth. but on her own insecurities and the societal scripts she has absorbed. Narrative checkpoint. He now sees that the threat is never truly other men, but the perception of deficiency he allows to fester within himself. The question becomes, can he occupy a mental space impervious to external judgment, where comparison is absorbed, understood, and neutralized? The mastery lies not in confrontation, but in total internal sovereignty, where her words are like wind on water ripples felt, but never sinking the vessel. The third scenario intensifies in public spaces, where she flaunts admiration for others, whether through social media posts or casual conversation. The hidden dynamic is social calibration. She measures his social influence against others to gauge his rank in her hierarchy. Most men respond with visible anxiety or competitive posturing, a desperate bid for attention or superiority. This collapse is catastrophic. The power response is intricate. He cultivates a magnetic presence that is socially independent of her input. He projects competence, charisma, and decisiveness in every interaction, silently communicating that his value exists regardless of her acknowledgement. Perception shifts. Peers notice the authority and self-assurance he embodies, a ripple effect that renders her comparisons impotent, for she now measures against a man who exists in a sphere beyond transient validation. The lesson is absolute. Social capital cannot be transferred through comparison. It must be internally anchored. The fourth encounter occurs in moments of conflict, where disagreements become arenas for testing dominance. She invokes other men as hypothetical standards, probing his limits. The hidden dynamic is the delicate balance of fear and respect. Most men collapse under this test, reacting emotionally, defensively, allowing her implied hierarchy to dictate the terms of engagement. The power response is surgical. He remains composed, controls the tempo of the interaction, answers with clarity, and introduces ambiguity that reasserts his autonomy without submission. Perception shifts. She perceives a man who is untouchable in his self-command, whose worth is internally validated, rendering external comparisons irrelevant. Narrative checkpoint. Now the question deepens. Can he extend this sovereignty into every domain of life, ensuring that no measure, no echo of another, ever destabilizes his core? The fifth scenario extends beyond personal interactions into a man's own self-perception, the crucible of all mastery. He must confront his instinct to compare himself to the men she idolizes, to measure his failures, to internalize inadequacy. The common response is resignation or compulsion to overcompensate, a cycle of exhaustion and futility. The power response is radical. He rewrites the script entirely. He defines his own benchmarks, rooted in relentless self-awareness and unapologetic personal standards. Every action, every decision, every moment of reflection is a declaration of internal sovereignty. Perception shifts. Not only does she cease comparisons, but he experiences liberation, a profound psychological emancipation where his value is immutable, self-contained, and unassailable. Application is the crucible where philosophy becomes lived experience. Understanding Machiavelli's insight into power as perception allows the man to navigate human interaction with precision. A woman's comparisons are a tool, a test of dominion over her mind as well as his own. Mastery is achieved not through denial, argument, or submission, but through unassailable presence. He must cultivate the trinity of internal confidence, social authority, and strategic detachment. He observes her references to other men, registers their content, but remains unmoved, translating her words into insight about her desires, fears, and perceptions. Each comparison becomes data, not judgment. Each invocation of another man is a subtle measure of her priorities, not a reflection of deficiency. This understanding reshapes every psychological interaction. In attraction, a man who embodies this philosophy projects magnetism beyond external metrics. In partnership, he remains a stabilizing force, impervious to the constant evaluations that plague the insecure. In life at large, he cultivates resilience, discipline, and foresight, knowing that every comparison posed by others is merely a shadow upon his self-determined path. Mastery is continuous, iterative, a constant reinforcement of identity against the ceaseless external echo of potential judgment. A man who internalizes this doctrine understands a simple truth. He is the architect of perception, both his own and others. Her comparisons are no longer threats. They are opportunities for demonstration of sovereignty. With each interaction, he exercises psychological precision, projecting dominance not through aggression, but through measured presence. He embodies a principle of immutable value, a magnetic center that draws acknowledgement without solicitation. Historical parallels echo this strategy. Leaders, thinkers, and warriors who grasped the subtle machinery of influence never competed directly. They commanded perception, orchestrated response, and secured loyalty through quiet mastery. This methodology extends into identity itself. He must define who he is, uncheckable by the shadows of others' achievements. He creates his metrics of success, calibrated by effort, skill, and integrity, not by external validation. The final edict emerges with clarity. The choice is absolute. He can succumb to perpetual comparison, a reactive life dictated by every echo of another man, or he can ascend to sovereignty, a self-contained force whose power lies in internal authority, psychological precision, and unassailable presence. This is not a tactic for fleeting advantage. It is a permanent transformation, a philosophical revolution enacted in the crucible of perception, interaction, and relentless self-mastery. Every word she utters that references another man becomes a mirror, and the man who has mastered Machiavellian insight sees his reflection not as fragmented, but whole. He measures himself only against his own potential, harnessing her comparisons as a tool to reinforce, refine, and assert his sovereign identity. In this, he achieves the ultimate triumph, a psychological dominion over the unseen battlefield, where victory is not declared by conquest, but by the unyielding constancy of self. The final truth resonates with unavoidable power. Comparison cannot harm the man who refuses to measure himself by any standard but his own. He steps into the world, undeterred, unshaken, a living embodiment of deliberate self-sovereignty. And as she attempts to weigh him against another, he exists beyond the scale. Her judgments fall away, irrelevant. The battlefield has shifted. He no longer reacts. He radiates. He has won. He walks through the city streets with a measured cadence, every step a statement of presence. He does not hurry. He does not pause for validation. The world unfolds around him, a theater of interaction. Yet he is the silent director, orchestrating perception without uttering a single demand. Every glance he encounters is met with calm awareness. Every whisper of comparison she might send in digital or verbal form is absorbed, catalogued, and rendered inert. This is the apex of psychological command. The man who owns himself cannot be undermined by another as standards, cannot be destabilized by echoes of hypothetical rivals. The hidden dynamic at play is deeper than mere ego. It is the architecture of power, a lattice invisible to those who react impulsively, yet absolute in its influence. Most men never comprehend this. They fight shadows and lose. He knows the battlefield is perception itself. In intimate conversation, when she subtly invokes the past, he remains unshaken. Her words, layered with insinuation and reference, are a test designed to provoke anxiety, to measure his reaction, to assert dominion through implication. The common response is anger, defensiveness, and repeated justification, an endless cycle that erodes the self. He does not respond in kind. Instead, he executes the power response. He listens, acknowledges without submission, and reframes the narrative through action and presence. The perception shift is immediate yet profound. She senses a man whose internal compass is immutable, a force unassailable by comparison, whose value exists independently of her judgments or the shadows of others. In this subtle mastery, he converts potential threat into advantage, transforming her probing into evidence of his unshakable authority. Public encounters amplify the principle. Social contexts are rife with comparison, a constant evaluation of rank, desirability, and influence. She mentions others casually, weaving their achievements into conversation, expecting her measure to provoke insecurity. Most men respond with frantic assertion, attempting to prove equivalence or superiority, exposing vulnerability in the process. He executes the power response with surgical precision. He exudes competence and composure, his social signals broadcasting control and mastery. The perception shift is systemic. Peers unconsciously acknowledge his authority. Her comparisons lose traction, and the environment itself begins to reflect the hierarchy he commands without confrontation. The lesson is inescapable. Influence is a function of perception, not rhetoric. Dominance is performed, not professed. Now the battlefield internalizes. A man must confront the recursive impulse to compare himself to the men she admires, to measure his inadequacies, to accept her framing as reality. The common response is self-erasure, the quiet erosion of confidence. The power response is deliberate and ruthless. He establishes internal metrics, defined by personal excellence, effort, and discipline. He creates a mental architecture impervious to external evaluation. Perception shifts profoundly within himself. No longer is he reactive, a shadow molded by the whims of external judgment. He becomes self-sovereign, a man whose internal authority eclipses the comparative narrative she attempts to construct. Every interaction becomes a proving ground, not for validation, but for mastery. When she brings up another, he absorbs the reference as data, analyzing her desires, insecurities, and behavioral patterns without ceding emotional control. This is strategic presence. Her comparisons act as mirrors, reflecting information he can use to enhance influence, rather than weapons capable of destabilization. He observes, interprets, and positions himself, not competitively, but authoritatively. The mastery is subtle, insidious, and total. She ceases to wield comparison as a weapon, because she perceives its futility in the presence of a man whose value is independent, grounded, and perceptibly sovereign. In relationships, the implication is transformative. A woman who attempts to rank him against others finds no foothold. His aura of confidence and self-determined value renders such comparisons irrelevant, disarming her psychological tests. Attraction deepens not through persuasion, but through the manifestation of his internal authority. She experiences his dominance indirectly, in the way he navigates space, decision, and interaction. This is the practical application of Machiavellian insight. Mastery is not brute conquest, but the orchestration of perception. His power radiates because it is inherent, uncontrived, and unchallengeable. Beyond the personal sphere, this philosophy extends into every domain of life. In career, social circles, and public presence, a man who internalizes this doctrine commands respect and influence effortlessly. Comparisons offered by others, whether subtle or overt, fail to penetrate his authority because it is self-anchored. He operates above the fray, untouchable by metrics imposed externally. This detachment is not disengagement, it is precision. It is the ability to perceive threats, evaluate opportunities, and act decisively without the distortions of insecurity. History echoes this approach. Leaders, generals, and thinkers who controlled perception shaped reality. Their dominion was psychological, their power almost invisible until fully realized. The internalization of this principle demands relentless discipline. Every day, he must practice awareness, refine self-perception, and fortify the metrics by which he measures himself. Comparisons by others become instruments of insight, not tools of despair. Each instance of reference, each mention of another man, is cataloged, analyzed, and repurposed to reinforce his own sovereignty. Psychological mastery is iterative. It grows as he consistently applies the principle across all interactions. His identity solidifies into an unyielding force. Comparison loses meaning because he no longer operates within the framework of external validation. Here, the final edict emerges. The choice is binary. He can live in reactive inferiority, forever molded by external standards, a perpetual student of others' measures, a prisoner of comparison. Or he can ascend to self-sovereignty, a deliberate architect of perception whose power is internal, absolute, and unassailable. There is no middle ground. A man who has mastered the Machiavellian principle of psychological dominance lives in a state where external echoes other men. Her references, societal rankings cannot touch him. Comparison is rendered irrelevant because he defines his own axis of value. This is the ultimate transformation. Mastery over the battlefield of perception. He moves through life with unshakable confidence, unassailable authority, and a profound understanding of influence. Her comparisons no longer dictate reality. His sovereignty radiates effortlessly. History, philosophy, and the subtle art of psychological strategy converge in his presence. He exists beyond the scale she applies. Victory is complete. He sits across from her, the conversation calm, measured, yet charged with the invisible currents of evaluation. She mentions another man's accomplishments casually, almost offhand, a test disguised as small talk. Most men would seize this moment with defensive insistence, a cascade of justifications, an attempt to assert superiority in real time. The collapse is immediate. Defensiveness signals insecurity, and insecurity invites further comparison. But he executes the power response with meticulous precision. He maintains composure, allows her words to flow without interruption, nods with a subtle, controlled acknowledgement, and then speaks with a quiet, commanding authority that reframes the frame itself. His words are deliberate, slow, and weighted. The perception shift is undeniable. She senses a man whose value is intrinsic, unshakable, and independent of her narrative. Comparisons lose all meaning when measured against an immutable presence. The practical extension of this mastery is relentless. Every facet of his life becomes a laboratory for cultivating internal authority. In social interaction, he projects competence, decisiveness, and charisma in ways that communicate power without overt assertion. In moments of intimacy, he listens, interprets, and responds in alignment with his own sovereignty, transforming potential insecurity into psychological leverage. He observes patterns, deciphers unspoken motivations, and positions himself strategically without ever appearing calculated. The hidden dynamic is that influence is derived not from argument or defense, but from presence, perception, and internalization of power. A common man never sees this. He reacts impulsively, validating the very comparisons that seek to diminish him. Consider the subtle interplay of social media, where the digital echoes of other men can amplify the sting of comparison. Most men react with jealousy, counterposts, or anxious attempts at visibility. The power response is counterintuitive, yet devastatingly effective. Indifference paired with strategic self-presentation. By curating actions, achievements, and appearances without need for direct validation, he communicates superiority silently, yet profoundly. Perception shifts. She and those around her perceive his elevated status not as an assertion, but as an undeniable fact. His value is neither demanded nor debated. It is recognized through its mere existence. Internal mastery requires rigorous psychological discipline. He must confront the automatic reflex to compare, to measure himself against her references. The common response is collapse into insecurity, erosion of self-esteem, and reactive behavior. The power response is conscious recalibration. He creates personal metrics rooted in effort, integrity, and self-defined accomplishment. He evaluates progress not through the lens of another's performance, but through the measurable expansion of his own capabilities. Perception shifts internally. He exists beyond the mirror of her comparisons, anchoring self-worth in immutable standards of his own creation. This internal sovereignty radiates outward, subtly reconfiguring external dynamics in his favor. In conflict scenarios, the principle reaches its apex. She tests boundaries, invokes hypotheticals, or subtly contrasts him with others to gauge dominance. The common response is emotional, reactive, and ultimately self-defeating. The power response is surgical. He controls tempo, reframes discourse, and introduces ambiguity that reinforces his autonomy without aggression. Perception shifts. She experiences the interaction not as a contest, but as a navigation of his authority. Comparison becomes meaningless in the presence of a man whose command of self dictates the terms of engagement. This is Machiavellian mastery in practice. Control over perception ensures that external metrics are impotent. The philosophical underpinning is simple yet profound. Mastery over comparison is mastery over the mind, the self, and the perception of others. Historical archetypes, from generals to statesmen, illustrate the principle. Those who controlled perception, who projected authority without desperate assertion, commanded influence effortlessly. They understood that victory is psychological before it is physical. That comparison is a tool for those without internal grounding, and that sovereignty is cultivated internally before it is recognized externally. By internalizing this principle, the man elevates himself into a plane where comparison has no power, where judgment is irrelevant, and where influence is an extension of presence rather than argument. Every interaction reinforces this architecture. Her mentions of other men cease to destabilize. Instead, they inform strategy. He interprets references not as critique, but as insight into preferences, priorities, and vulnerabilities. Each conversation, each subtle test, becomes a demonstration of internal authority. She perceives not a man measuring himself against others, but a man who exists as an absolute standard, a locus of power and calm that renders any comparative framing irrelevant. The hidden dynamic of influence, the architecture of sovereignty, is realized in every gesture, every word, every silent assertion of presence. The choice is definitive and inescapable. He can surrender to external judgment, living perpetually within the comparative frameworks imposed by her or society, or he can cultivate and enact total internal sovereignty, projecting influence and presence that nullifies comparison before it can manifest. This is not about winning arguments, controlling emotion, or asserting dominance through coercion. It is about mastery over the battlefield of perception, the unseen and often unacknowledged theater where value is measured, influence is claimed, and identity is forged. Victory is not external, it is the internal transformation that renders external comparison impotent. A man who fully embodies this doctrine experiences liberation. His interactions are no longer defined by her references or others' achievements. He defines his axis of value, measures success on self-determined scales, and radiates authority through unassailable presence. Her comparisons are absorbed, neutralized, and ultimately irrelevant. In this state, psychological dominance is complete. Mastery is continuous, iterative, and irreversible. The battlefield is perception, and he commands it entirely. He rises each morning with a purpose that transcends validation, with a discipline that cannot be shaken by whispers of other men's achievements. He understands that mastery is not merely reactive. It is proactive, deliberate, and unrelenting. Every choice he makes, from posture to tone, from word to gesture, is calibrated to project authority without effort. The hidden dynamic is absolute. Influence is created internally, projected externally, and perceived universally. Most men never comprehend this subtlety. They argue, they defend, they measure themselves against every external standard. He does not. He defines the standard. He embodies it. Every comparison she or the world might attempt to impose is instantly rendered obsolete by the fact of his presence. In private moments, where emotional vulnerabilities emerge and past references surface, his composure becomes a weapon. Most men react with defensiveness, anxiety, or overcompensation. He reacts with conscious neutrality, acknowledging without ceding ground, listening without submission, speaking with authority that reframes the interaction entirely. The perception shift is immediate. She recognizes a man whose internal compass is unyielding, whose value is untouchable, and whose presence commands respect without plea or performance. In this, he transforms potential threats into opportunities to reinforce sovereignty. Every mention of another man becomes a reflection of her insecurities, not a reflection of his deficiencies. Public and social spaces amplify these principles. She may casually recount or highlight other men, invoking competition implicitly. Most men falter, seeking attention, justification, or validation, their reactions betraying insecurity. He embodies the counterintuitive power response. He moves through space with unassailable confidence, projecting competence and charisma, making no demands for recognition, yet receiving acknowledgement naturally. Perception shifts not because he insists, but because his internal authority is evident. Influence is absolute, social hierarchy is recalibrated, and her attempts at comparison dissolve in the presence of his self-contained power. The internal battlefield is the final and most crucial arena. He confronts his own reflexive impulses toward comparison, the desire to measure his worth against men she admires, the echo of external standards. The common response is self-doubt, anxiety, and reactionary behavior. The power response is total recalibration. He creates and enforces his own metrics, defined by discipline, effort, skill, and integrity. Perception shifts internally. He no longer reacts to the narrative of others because he exists in a plane where comparison is irrelevant. Psychological sovereignty is absolute, a fortress of internal authority that projects outward with natural force. Every interaction, every subtle probe, every casual mention of another man is transformed into an opportunity for reinforcement, for demonstration of presence. He listens, interprets, and positions himself with precision, projecting calm authority while absorbing insight from her words. The hidden dynamic is revealed. Influence is exercised not through aggression, but through unshakable presence. She perceives not a competitor, but a man whose identity is complete, self-determined, and impermeable. Her comparisons lose efficacy because they operate in a domain where he alone defines reality. In relationships, mastery manifests profoundly. Attraction is no longer about persuasion, argument, or performance. It is the natural consequence of psychological authority. He occupies a space where comparison is meaningless, where her evaluations are irrelevant, and where influence radiates effortlessly. Each reference to other men becomes data, not judgment. Each potential test becomes an opportunity to project calm dominance. His presence communicates power, not through coercion, but through the sheer weight of self-sovereignty. The philosophical principle is clear. Control of perception is mastery itself. Historical exemplars demonstrate the truth. Leaders, generals, and strategists who manipulated perception rather than reacting to it achieved power without contest. The battlefield is mental before it is external, and the man who internalizes this principle operates beyond comparison. External judgments, references, and competition cannot touch him because his authority is inherent, rooted, and absolute. He is the architect of perception, and in this, he achieves the highest form of victory. Every action, every gesture, every choice reinforces this sovereignty. Comparisons are neutralized not through argument, but through consistent projection of internal authority. He measures success only by his standards, continuously refining his internal metrics, ensuring that his value is unassailable. She notices not deficiencies, but the radiance of self-contained power. The hidden dynamic becomes fully manifest. Influence, attraction, and authority are consequences of presence, not persuasion. The final edict is irrevocable. He may surrender to comparison, living perpetually within frameworks defined by others, reacting to every external measure, or he may ascend to total sovereignty, projecting authority that renders comparison meaningless. Victory is internal, and its effect radiates outward, transforming every interaction into a demonstration of psychological mastery. He exists beyond the scale she or society applies. Her references, her comparisons, her subtle tests, all are impotent against the man who has mastered himself. He walks through life unshaken, each step an affirmation of identity, each moment a demonstration of sovereignty. He commands presence, projects authority, and interprets the world without yielding to external judgment. Her comparisons cannot pierce him. They are absorbed, understood, and neutralized. The battlefield is perception, and he reigns. His mastery is complete, iterative, and irreversible. Victory is his by principle, not argument, and the measure of all others becomes irrelevant in the face of his unwavering authority.